She came to Thornhallow to ruin me, and I handed her the keys myself. It was the last week of October, the rain coming off the moor in gray sheets, and I found her standing in my stable yard without so much as a shawl over her head, holding a letter of character that had gone to pulp in her fingers. My grooms had left her there. No one at Thornhallow made a stranger welcome in those years. They had learned it from me. "I've come about the copying post," she said. She did not curtsy. She looked up at me the way a person looks at a door they have been walking toward for a very long time. I knew her before she gave me a name. 11 years is a long while, but a man remembers a jaw, and hers was her father's exactly, that stubborn, level set of it, as though the world had already been argued with and found wanting. She had his hands, too. I saw them when she gave me the ruined letter. Square, ink-stained at the second finger, the hands of somebody who wrote for a living and did it well. "Your name," I said. "Lyle," she said, "Miss Lyle." It was a lie. It was her mother's name before she married, and the girl said it without a flicker, and I let it stand. That was the first choice I made about her, and every other one came out of it. "You'll be cold," I said. "Go to the kitchen. Mrs. Paget will find you something hot." "Am I engaged, then?" "You're engaged." "You haven't read my letter, Your Grace." "It's a wet rag," I said. "And you're the only person in the county who has applied to work in this house in 3 years. Go inside." I should tell you what I was in those years so that you understand what she had walked into. I was the Duke of Thornhallow, and the country called me the Silent Duke, and they did not mean it kindly. They meant that a man had died on my land under a cloud, and that I had never once opened my mouth about it. Silence, in a county with long winters and little to do, is read as guilt. I let it be read. I had my reasons, and my reasons had a grave in Nettlefold churchyard, and I was not at liberty to explain either one. So I dined alone, and rode alone, and dealt fairly with my tenants and coldly with everyone else. And I was 39 years old, and had the reputation of a man twice that age and half that temper. And now the steward's daughter was in my kitchen, drying her boots at my fire, calling herself by a name that was not hers. Mrs. Paget came to me that night with her hands folded, which was how she came when she meant to disapprove. "The new girl's asking about the muniment room," she said. "Is she?" "She wants to know if the old ledgers are kept there or at the bank." "And you told her?" "I told her it wasn't my place to say, Your Grace." A pause. "Nor yours to let her ask, if you'll forgive me." I went to the window. The rain had turned to a fine drift, and the lamps in the stable yard swam in it. "Give her the keys," I said. Mrs. Paget was quiet for a long moment. She had been at Thornhallow since before I inherited it. She had known Ambrose Weld, and she had carried his daughter on her hip once at a harvest supper when the child was too small to walk the length of the hall. "All of them," she said. "All of them. I have been asked since why I did that. Why I opened the one room in the house that could hang me in the county's eyes, and gave the key to the one person alive who wanted to see me hang. I have never had a tidy answer. The nearest I can get is this. For 11 years I had guarded a thing that was not mine, and I was tired, and here came a young woman with her father's hands and her father's jaw who had every right in the world to what was in that room. I could not tell her. I could only leave the door unlocked and let the truth take its chances. She began work on the Monday. The muniment room at Thornhallow is a long stone chamber over the old chapel, cold as a well-lined floor to ceiling with the estate's papers. Rentals, surveys, tithe maps, 40 years of accounts in leather boards. Her task was plain enough. To copy the rent rolls fare for the Lady Day audit, in a clear hand, at 4 shillings the week and her board. The house did not know what to make of her. Thornhallow had been a silent place for a decade, 9 indoor servants moving about a man who did not speak at meals. And here was a young woman who said good morning to the scullery maid by name, and asked the boot boy where he was from, and had the whole kitchen talking by Wednesday. On the Friday, I came through the back passage and heard her ask Mrs. Paget, in a voice pitched exactly right for carelessness, whether it was true that a steward had died on the estate. Mrs. Paget said that it was, and that it had been a wet night, and that she had the still room to see to. That evening, my housekeeper came and stood in front of me with her hands folded. "She'll not stop asking," she said. "No. And am I to lie to the girl, Your Grace?" "You are to say what you know," I said. "That a good man went into a flooded ford and did not come out, and that nobody in this house ever saw him take a farthing. That is the truth. It simply isn't all of it. There's them as would call that a fine distinction. There are, I said. Good night, Mrs. Paget. She worked like a machine that had been oiled with grief. I would go up at 10 in the evening on the pretense of fetching a map, and find her still there with the candle burned down to a stub and her breath showing in the air. You'll go blind, I said. Then I'd better hurry, Your Grace. Have you eaten? I have, she dipped her pen. You keep your accounts very close, for a man who has said not to care what becomes of this estate. Who says it? Everyone between here and Kirkbride. That was the first time she put Kirkbride in front of me, watching to see whether the word did anything to my face. It was the name of the charity school on the far side of the moor. I kept my face still, and I have wondered since whether she saw the effort. People will say a great deal when a man gives them nothing to correct, I said. Then correct them. No. Why not? Because it's late, I said, and you have 11 pages to go, Miss Lyle. She laughed. It was a short, surprised sound, as though it had got out before she could stop it, and she looked as furious with herself as anyone I have ever seen. I went down the stairs with that laugh going round in me like a coal in a grate, and I remember thinking, with perfect clarity, this is going to cost you everything, Julian. I was not wrong, I only had the price wrong. The county at that time was very fond of my cousin, Bertram Crail. He had the sort of face that gets a man invited everywhere, pink, pleasant, always a little sorry about something. He had been my father's ward. He had married a woman with property in the next valley, and he sat on the bench with the magistrates twice a quarter and was pitied in a comfortable way for having so cold a relation as me. It was Crail who had first said the word *thief* about Ambrose Weld, 11 years before, in a warm room full of men who wanted to believe him. It has always struck me how little effort it takes. One word said kindly and a man is finished. Crail wrote in November to say he would come for the Lady Day audit and the rent day, as he did every year. He came to be seen. The county understood, and I understood, that when I died without an heir the estate would go to him, and he liked to be looked at against that background, the way a man stands beside a horse he intends to buy. I gave the letter to Mrs. Paget to answer, and went up to the muniment room, and found Miss Lyle standing at the window with a ledger open in her arms, and her face the color of the paper. "This one's out of the run," she said. "What?" "The rentals go in an unbroken series." She turned the board so I could see the spine. "Except that the volume for the year 11 years past isn't here. There's a gap where it stood. The dust says so." "Does it?" "It does, Your Grace." She set it down. "Where is it?" "In the bank at Kirkbride," I said, "in a deed box with the surveys." "Why?" "Because that is where I put it." She stood very straight. She was not a tall woman. She had the trick of seeming so. "I have come to prove something," she said. "You may as well know it." "I know it," I said, and left her. I want to be honest about what happened over the next weeks, because the version the county tells has it that I set out to charm her, and I did no such thing. I had not charmed anyone since I was 22. What happened was slower and far worse. I got used to her. I got used to a light burning over the chapel when I came in wet from the far fields. I got used to arguing about the price of lime. She thought my agent was robbing me on the drainage, and she was right, and she proved it with 2 columns and a pencil in 11 minutes, and did not gloat, which I found harder to bear than gloating. I got used to being contradicted at my own table, because I began asking her to eat at it, an outrageous thing in that house, and Mrs. Paget said not one word about it, which told me exactly what Mrs. Paget thought. And she got used to me, which was the thing I had no defense against. In December, old Ephraim Sallow's wife took the fever at the bottom of the village. I sat up with her 2 nights, because there was no one else to, and because Sallow had taught me to ride. And on the second night I came back at 4 in the morning and found Miss Lyle awake in the kitchen with a fire built up and the kettle on. "You needn't have," I said. "No," she agreed and poured. I sat down. I had straw on my coat, and I had not slept in 2 days, and I was in no condition to be looked at by anybody. "They tell it in the village that you never come down the hill," she said at last. "I don't, not for calls." "For this, then." Mrs. Sallow is 81 years old, and she called me a wicked boy for 30 of them, I said. Somebody had better be there when she stops. She turned her cup round in her hands. The fire was doing that thing fires do at 4 in the morning, when the room goes small and honest. You make it very difficult, she said quietly. To do what? To keep hold of the thing I came here holding. I should have let it lie. Any sensible man would have. Instead, I said, don't let go of it. You'll want it later. She looked up sharply. Whatever she saw in my face, she did not ask about it, and I have thought since that she was already beginning to be afraid of the answer. Then came the day with the mare, which I would not tell you at all except that it is the day I stopped pretending to myself. There was a young gray in the yard that had come from a farm in the west where they had used a whip on her more than sense allows, and she would let no one within 4 feet of her head. On a bright, bitter morning in January, I came round the corner of the barn and found Miss Lyle standing in the middle of the box with her back to the wall, and the mare's nose an inch from her shoulder, both of them perfectly still. I did not move. I stood in that doorway for what felt like an hour while a woman in a mendied gray dress waited out a frightened animal with more patience than I have ever had for anything. The mare put her head down at last and breathed against her sleeve. There, said Miss Lyle to the horse. Nobody's asking you anything. Coming out, she caught her heel on the sill of the box. I had her by the arm before I knew I had moved. She was light and steady, and she did not pull away at once, and we stood there in the cold with the mare shifting behind us and the whole yard perfectly silent. Thank you, she said. You're not hurt? No. I let go of her arm. I remember the exact quality of the light and the smell of the straw and how loud my own heart was. And I remember thinking that I was a fool of 39 who had let a young woman into his house under a name he knew to be false because she had her father's hands, and that when she found what she had come to find, she would never look at me again as long as she lived. I was so nearly right. Bertram Crale came to us at the end of January, 3 weeks before anyone expected him, on the excuse of the drainage. He was charming at dinner. He was always charming at dinner. He admired the soup and the fire and the improvement in the North Road, and he looked twice at the young woman sitting at my table in a mendied gray dress and asked her not one question, which told me he had already asked them all in the servants' hall. You've taken on a clerk, he said over the mutton. I have. A woman clerk. A good one. Well, he said comfortably, you were always original. He turned to her with that pink, sorry, kindly face. You'll find the accounts of this estate in some disorder, I'm afraid, Miss Lyle, is it? There was a bad business here years ago. The steward of the day helped himself for the better part of a 12-month. I set down my glass. Did he? Said Honora. Oh, thoroughly. Drowned running off with the last of it, poor devil. It broke my cousin's faith in the whole tribe of stewards. You'll notice he has kept none since. He shook his head at me fondly. You were too soft with the man, Julian. You should have had him before the bench in the first week. The candles stood between us. I could not see her hands. What was his name? She said. Weld, said Crale. Ambrose Weld, a hard-working sort, which is how they always manage it. And was there a family? A girl somewhere, I believe, put out on the parish. He reached for the salt. One is sorry for the children, but there it is. Bad blood tells in my experience. I have gone back over that dinner more often than any other hour of my life because of what she did next. She did not weep, and she did not stand. She set her knife down, straightened it beside her plate until it lay exactly true, and said in the pleasantest voice in the world, How interesting, sir. Do you happen to recall the year? Crale did not recall the year. Crale recalled nothing at all, in the way men have when a subject is warm to the touch, and he was on to the price of wheat inside a minute, and he did not look at her again that night. I rose before the cheese and stood at the window with my back to the room, which the county would have called rudeness, and which was in fact the only thing standing between my cousin and my hands. Later on the stairs, she stopped me. You were angry, she said. Yes. Why, he only said what everyone says. He said it at my table. She studied me over the candle she carried. For a silent man, your grace, she said slowly, you are a very loud one. And she went up. I stayed on those stairs a good while afterwards, holding the rail like a man on a deck, because I had come within one word of telling her the whole of it, and because I had seen, in the way she straightened that knife, that she was going to get there without me. She found it in the second week of February. I had gone to Kirkbride to the bank, and I had brought the deed box home with me, deliberately, though I told myself it was for the audit, and I had left it in the muniment room, and I had not locked it. I heard her come down the stairs. I have never heard anyone come downstairs like that before or since. She stood in the door of the library with a slip of paper in her hand, and her face absolutely white. "What is this?" I did not need to look. I knew the paper. It was the bank's quarterly advice, and it was one of 44 of them. "Read it to me," I said. "Paid on account of His Grace the Duke of Thornhallow to the Kirkbride Foundation School for the maintenance and instruction of one female scholar, the sum of £9 12 shillings. Her voice did not shake until the last part. "Quarterly, for 11 years, Your Grace, I was that scholar." "I know. You asterisk no asterisk. I have known since the moment I saw you in the yard," I said. "You have your father's hands, Miss Weld." She sat down on the arm of the chair by the door, very suddenly, as though her legs had simply been withdrawn from the arrangement. "Then say it," she said. "Say why." "I can't." "He drowned running from you." She was crying now and furious about it and wiping it off with the back of her wrist like a child. "That's what they told me at that school, that my father took your money and ran and the Ford took him, and the reason they were kind to me was that I was a thief's daughter and charity is what thieves' daughters get. And all that time it was asterisk your asterisk £9 12. Why? To keep me quiet? To keep me away?" "No." "Then why?" "Because I gave my word," I said, "to a man who could barely speak that his girl would never carry it. And I have kept it for 11 years, and I will not break it in a library at 9 o'clock at night to make myself comfortable." She stood up. She was shaking. She looked at me the way you look at a landscape you have been walking through in the dark, when the sun comes up and the road turns out to be nowhere near where you thought. "Then I will find it myself," she said, "and I will not thank you for it." "No," I said, "you shouldn't." She went back up the stairs. The light over the chapel burned until morning, and the morning after that, and I let it, because I had given her the keys in October precisely so that this could happen, and a man does not get to choose which parts of his own decision he lives with. Here is what she did in 19 days, alone, at a copying clerk's wages. She sent to Kirkbride for the volume I had left in the bank. I had brought it home myself, but she would not take it from my hand, and I did not blame her. She laid it beside the counterfoils of the estate checkbook for the same year, and beside 4 years of her father's ordinary working accounts, which she knew letter by letter, the way you know a voice through a wall. I did not go up to the muniment room in those 19 days. It was the hardest abstinence of my life. I sent up coal and candles by the dozen, and Mrs. Paget with a tray at 8 and again at 1, and the trays came down empty, which was the whole of my news of her. Once, on the 9th night, I met her on the stair with a volume against her shoulder, her sleeves pushed back and inked to the elbow. "Do you need anything?" I said. "The contractor's book for that year. Sallow's boy says his father hauled the lime and was paid in the ordinary way, out of the ordinary hand." "It's at the estate office." "Then I'll walk down in the morning." "It is 4 miles. "Yes," she said, and went past me. She walked it. She walked it in February, on a bad road, in boots I had not been permitted to replace, and she walked back with the book buttoned inside her cloak. And I stood at the library window and watched her come up the hill and did not go down to meet her, because she had told me in the plainest terms that she would take nothing in this from my hand, and because I had learned by then that there was very little I would not do for her, including nothing at all. And she saw what no auditor, no magistrate, and no duke had seen in 11 years, that the entries which damned Ambrose Weld were in Ambrose Weld's hand for the first 3 words and in somebody else's for the figures. It is a small thing, a crossbar carried too far, a figure 8 closed at the top where her father always left his open, a run of 9 entries over 11 months in which sums drawn for the drainage works had been written up as paid to the contractors, and then in a slightly heavier ink altered afterwards to read as paid into the steward's own hand. 9 alterations, every one of them made after the fact, every one of them in the same second hand. She brought it to me on the last day of February. She laid the 2 volumes on my desk, and the counterfoils, and a sheet of her own fair copying with the 9 entries set out side by side, and she stood back with her chin up and her eyes red. "I am not asking you to speak," she said. I am telling you that I can prove my father did not steal, and that whoever did it wrote it in your ledger in your house, and that I am going to say so at the audit in front of the magistrates in my own name." I looked at those pages for a long time. "Miss Weld," I said, "do you know whose hand that is?" "No." "I do," I said. "I have known for 11 years. I could never prove it. You have just proved it." And then, because I was not made of stone, whatever the county said, I had to turn away and stand at the window for a while before I could go on. Rent day at Thornhallow is held in the Great Hall, and it is not a private thing. The tenants come, and the parish officers, and 2 of the county magistrates to witness the audit, and by long custom Thornhallow feeds anyone who walks up the hill. That year there were perhaps 90 people in the hall, and a fire the size of a cart, and my cousin Bertram Crail at my right hand in a new coat, being pleasant to the vicar. The accounts were read. The magistrates signed, and Crail rose with his glass to make the little speech he made every year about the continuity of the family, and got as far as the words, and in due course before a young woman at the far end of the hall stood up. "Your Grace, Sir Everard, may I speak?" 90 faces turned. She had on the same mended gray dress. She had a bundle of papers under her arm, and she was, I think, the most frightened person in that hall and the only one prepared to do anything about it. "You may," I said. "My name is not Lyle," she said. "I have worked in this house since October under my mother's name, and I did it on purpose, and I'll answer for it. My name is Honora Weld. My father was Ambrose Weld, steward of this estate, and 11 years ago this county decided he was a thief, and he drowned at Carden Ford before anyone thought to ask him." You could hear the fire, nothing else. "That's an old business," said Crail. "It is 11 years old, sir," she said, "and I have spent all of it being somebody's charity. I have here the rental for that year and the counterfoils beside it, and I will show any man in this room, in 3 minutes, that 9 entries in my father's ledger were altered after they were written, in a hand that was not his." "The girl is grieving," Crail said to the room in that kind way of his. "It does her credit, but we are not going to reopen." "Sit down, Bertram," I said. I had not raised my voice. I had not needed to raise my voice in that county for 11 years. I came round the table, and I took the pages out of her hands, and I set them in front of Sir Everard Pike, who had signed the ledger himself in his own younger and stupider days, and I put my finger on the 9th line. "Look at the 8s, I said. He looked at them for a long time. He was an honest old man who had been comfortably wrong for a decade, and I watched him understand it, and I watched him go gray. And then, in the great hall of Thornhallow, in front of 90 people, I broke the only promise I have ever broken in my life. 11 years ago, I said, my steward came to me at 11 at night and told me that money drawn for the drainage was not reaching the contractors. He asked for 3 days to make it certain. On the 3rd night he rode to Kirkbride to fetch the contractor's own receipts, because he would not accuse a man of this house without them. Carden Ford was up in flood. He put his horse at it anyway, because he was that sort of man, and the horse went down, and they pulled him out an hour later. He lived until about 4 in the morning. I was there. He was not able to say very much. What he said was that the papers were in his coat, and they were, and the water had had them, and there was not one legible figure on any of them. And then he said, "Don't let her carry it, she's 5. So I paid the missing money into the estate out of my own pocket, and closed the account and never said one word, because the only other course was a prosecution I could not win, in which this county would have been invited to believe that Ambrose Weld had been in it up to his neck, and his widow would have died in a poorhouse, and his daughter would have been turned out of every door between here and the sea. I could not clear his name. I could only refuse to blacken it further and hold my tongue, and see that the child was fed and taught. That is the whole of my silence. You may all have thought what you liked of me. Most of you did. I turned. The hand in that ledger is yours, Bertram. He said several things. It does not matter what. Sir Everard had the volume open in front of him and his hand flat on the page, and 2 other men were leaning over his shoulder, and my cousin's pink, pleasant face was doing something I had waited 11 years to see. He left the hall before the fire had burned down another inch. He was off the bench inside the month, and out of the county before the summer, and I have not spoken his name since that night except in this telling. But that is not the part I have carried with me. The part I have carried is this. When it was over, when the magistrates were standing about the table with their spectacles out, and the tenants were all talking at once, I walked the length of that hall to where Honora Weld was standing quite alone by the door with her hands pressed together, and I stopped in front of her, and every soul in the room stopped with me. "Miss Weld," I said, "your father was an honest man and the best servant this house ever had, and this county owes him a debt it cannot pay, and I owe you 11 years of a truth that was yours and not mine to keep. I am sorry. I would do it again, and I would still be sorry." "I know," she said. "I have one more thing to say, and I would rather say it badly here than well tomorrow." I heard the hall go quiet behind me, and I did not care. "I have been alone in this house since I was 29. I told myself it suited me. Then you came into my stable yard in the rain and told me a lie to my face, and I have not had one honest hour of peace since, and I have not wanted one." I put out my hand. "I don't want a clerk. I want you at that table where you have been sitting since December, for the rest of my life, if you will have a man the whole county has been calling cold since before you could read." She looked at my hand. Then she put hers into it, that square, ink-stained, capable hand, and she said, loud enough for the back of the hall, "I will have him." 90 people made a noise. I still hear sometimes when the wind is in the chimney. We were married in Nettlefold Church at the end of April, and half the county came, and the other half wrote afterwards to say they had always thought there was more to the business than had been given out. And I let them keep their dignity, because Honora asked me to, and because I have never denied her anything since. Her father's stone in that churchyard says what it should say now. It cost me a stonemason and 11 years, and I would have paid 100. She sits at the north end of the muniment room still, in the good chair, with the drainage accounts in front of her and a great deal to say about them. Her father's surveying chain hangs on the wall behind her, coiled on its nail. Sometimes I stand in the door and watch her work, the way I did that first October when I was a proud, silent, ruined sort of man who thought he had nothing left to protect. And I think of the extraordinary thing she never quite believes when I say it. I did not keep her, she kept me. And when she signs the rentals now, at the foot of the page in that clear, steady hand of her father's, she signs her own name, and it is mine as well, and there is not a soul in this county who does not know how she came by both.